Hello, this is Hyun Park from Amalgam Insights. Thank you so much for joining us today for TEM Expo Webinar 6 around invoice and payment processing, the race against time. This is an exciting topic for me because this is the nuts and bolts of what I used to do when I still had a real job in IT, and this is where I feel like a lot of money gets lost, even normal times. In today's world where we've all been in this COVID quarantine, remote work challenge, and we've been adding and removing accounts like crazy, either for unfortunate reasons, such as laying off employees, or simply because we're trying to make employees more productive. There was a lot of chaos that went on. So in today's webinar, I'll be introducing and digging into some of the ideas that we've been talking about in the first 5 webinars, as well as providing some direction for what your company needs to think about over the next 6 months as you're trying to save money, manage cash, and frankly protect your financial position for more important things, such as keeping jobs in place and maintaining revenue streams, maintaining supply chain. So, first of all, thank you to our foundation sponsor, MobiCord, sponsoring both these webinars, as well as our event on July 14th, TEM Expo. As you know, this webinar is a precursor to the TEM Expo virtual event that we'll be holding on July 14th. Our goal is to help our attendees collectively save $1 billion in 2020 by providing directional guidance and by just from an understanding of getting that aggregated IT spend and then pointing them in the right direction to make sure that they're not giving up money as they've had to leak money in the past month or two simply in the overages and the new accounts and the shadow IT that was necessary to make work happen in March and April. So this format's going to be a virtual event where we're going to have a lobby. We're going to have several, call it booths within this lobby where you can meet our sponsors, where you can go to the sessions, where you can see the keynote, perhaps see a few interesting cameos and surprises, and then get some charity and networking opportunities as well. We're looking for this to fill in the gap that some of you may not have been able to fill because of our inability to travel anywhere. This is an opportunity to get to meet some of your peers and to talk about best practices, as well as hear about best practices from both peers and thought leaders. And I'm bringing together speakers right now, so this is a fun time to be able to bring this together to you and hopefully be able to fill some of these gaps that exist in our professional lives right now. So why are we running TEM Expo? Why am I even doing this? So I've been doing IT expenses for 20 years, either on the dark side when I was actually on the telecom vendor side, sending out these ridiculous complex bills, and then also working on the IT side where I had to cut costs. I remember doing a telecom expense management job back when the last recession happened in the 2008 timeframe. And back then, I did my best to help my company, but I knew that there were a lot of things that I did that I could have shared with other people, and I wasn't able to because of where I was professionally, because I lacked the audience. Now that that's not the case, I want to change that. And given that we are at a time when estimated 36 million people are out of jobs right now, with another 3 million expected to apply for unemployment this week. That need to save as many jobs in the short term as well as save cash in the medium term is the most important thing that any company can think of. And we happen to be in a position that, from an IT perspective, we can contribute to that bottom line. So that's what I think about right now. This chart right here talks about the massive labor shift in the U.S. These 4 bars you see here. Blue bar is work from home full-time. The orange bar is work from home part-time. The gray bar is working at the office of the field. and the yellow bar is basically functional unemployment, people considered unemployed from a U.S. perspective. And even if you can't see the numbers based on the size of your screen, what you can see is that there's a massive difference in these colors. The blue bar is obviously gigantic now. The gray bar is much smaller than it used to be for people working in the office right now. And then that yellow bar, obviously, of people who have gone from are recently unemployed, obviously stands out. The work profile that we see here is massively different, which affects us both from an IT perspective as well as from in terms of the work environment that we currently have now. So just, that's the big picture for why we're doing all this, why we have all these webinars, and then why we're going to be holding a day-long virtual event on this. There's a lot of best practices that need to be shared simply to keep this from getting worse and to make sure that we recover after all of this. We have a part to play in this. So all that said, the other piece of this is that, in my experience, there's this IT rule of 30, and that every unmanaged IT spend category averages 30% waste. We see this over and over and over again. When mobility came out, when BYOD came out, every time you looked at the costs, whether it was the direct costs or the total cost of ownership from providing services to manage these things, there was only just 30% in extra waste. If you look at Amazon's cloud services, even Amazon Web Services, what did they do? They have 30% profit because they're able to provide these services, and then they don't provide them at cost, obviously. They add an extra 30%. It just seems to, this 30% number shows up over and over and over again in terms of either profit margin or the waste that shows up in unmanaged IT spend categories. And across all spend categories, that typically makes up about 1% of bookings because IT typically, on average, this depends a lot from company to company, makes up about 3.3% of bookings overall. And then when you look at 30% of that, that's 1%. So if you're $1 billion per year company, that means you potentially have up to $10 million hiding in waste if you haven't been managing your IT tightly and have just been paying your bills and you're working and updating your contracts with very incremental discounts. So there's a lot of money that's potentially hiding there, and with the amount of flux that is going on from an IT and technology perspective there, a lot of that waste that you may have cleaned out in a very organized fashion may be seeking back in simply because of the world that we lived in. So thinking about managing invoices, first of all, let's think about where we are in terms of the 6 stages of managing COVID IT. I brought up this framework in the first webinar that we did, and as you know, stage 1 was about survivor mode, shadow IT edition. You did what you had to survive. It's Mad Max. It's just doing what you have to do, and that's what we did. We all got Zoom bombed, and we all figured out what we couldn't get into with VPN and virtual, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But at this point, we've figured out what we're doing at home from a working perspective. For better or for worse, we've been in this situation for, call it 6 to 8 weeks, depending on where you live in the United States, even more longer if, depending on where else you are. So at this point, we're thinking more about stage 2, how to secure your business, and stage 3, how to audit your environment. That's where you should be right now as a company, trying to figure out what happened and now how to get better. And based on that, now you have to decide kind of on 2 approaches, either a MOM approach or a zero approach. A MOM being month-over-month invoice reviews versus kind of a zero-based budgeting approach, which is deeper and more complicated approach. And for companies making big remote shifts based on COVID era, up to half of your savings might be hiding right here. So there's going to be a huge amount of change that you're going to be making to your IT environment. And this is the foundational work that you can do to figure out how your bills are changing. Honestly, the bills you're getting right now are the first full month of your remote financial environment. You just couldn't benchmark it before this because, frankly, we didn't have a full month of bills to work with. Well, this is your first full month that you have to look at and to be able to start making decisions based on that. You know, when you think about this from a month-over-month perspective, this is the time to line up February, March, and April very tactically to figure out your changes in your accounts, features, and usage, and then figure out what's been abandoned, substituted, added, and really document that. This is the time to do it because every month that goes by from now on that you haven't done this is a month that you're going to be dealing with that crud of bloat that ends up spending money and costing your company actual opportunities in other areas, whether it be around your cost structure or whether it be around being able to invest in other technologies if you are moving into a more remote environment and have the money to spend. You know, either way, there's an immense opportunity here, right now, looking directly at what did once upon a time February look like in terms of our spend versus where are we now, where the changes occurred. So to dig into this a little further, let's think about that from feature, product, and service changes. When you think about these changes, I think about these in kind of three key categories. One is around abandoned services, which may be due to furloughs, layoffs, or simply due to services that have been assigned to people who haven't been there for a long time, or projects that are no longer being run. You know, there's a lot of reasons that these things get abandoned. Some people call these zombie accounts, or services, or zero usage. You know, but these are basically services that are not being used at all. Traditionally, we've done our 3-month review and seen whether these things have usage or not. At this point, you have an opportunity to look more tactically and just look at if there's zero usage specifically in April. This is at least a leading indicator that these services are either spares or copies or over-trunked and might need to be removed in the near future. But this is the time to get that on your radar. You don't want to wait at this point until July, until you have your 3 months of no usage to figure out what to do next, because this is not a time to be complacent and just wait for those expense savings opportunities to occur. This is a time to be proactive and to be able to make a difference in your cash position. Second of all, a corporate substitution. So this might be a case where you have several duplicate types of services. So from a conferencing perspective, think about WebEx, Zoom, GoToMeeting, Google Meet, all these different types of services, that exist, and you might have all of those. And one of these services might be winning. So you might find that, I don't know, you're using WebEx less and Zoom more, and it's causing some sort of difference in usage, utilization, logins, whatever. Take a look at that, because there might be a real opportunity there to boost your sourcing opportunities with the vendor that you want to work with, or that your end users, your internal customers want to work with, versus those that are losing regardless of what your history might be with them. Take a look at how your customers, your internal customers, are actually using technology at this point, and make those decisions accordingly. And then on the bottom, you can see shadow substitution. Shadow IT is something we've talked about for a while. Obviously, a lot of shadow IT happened over the past couple of months. And many corporate services may have been replaced by consumer services, especially since there's always an app for that, and there's always a way to get around security if employees find that was getting in their way, or if they simply weren't able to access the services that they need. This is the time to figure out how much of that shadow substitution occurred. And on the right side, you can see the importance of working with purchasing and expense management to ID new shadow IT across all of these areas is really important. This is the time to start building teamwork and working with those employees again, now that we know how to do so from home, it's time to set up that meeting and figure out how do I collaborate with my purchasing card managers, my expense managers, and the people who are handling the little ticky-tack things that usually hide behind the scenes and get ignored. Because in this case, this is where a lot of this IT spend will be hiding that we need to support going forward. And unlike before, when we had an idea that it was really just happening in mobility, now it could be happening all over the place as home networks have become increasingly important for getting work done. Next up, there are also usage issues to consider. So I've talked about some of these already, but at a granular level, it becomes tricky to figure out how many zero usage devices and features exist when you could have multiple devices per employee, whether it be a smartphone or a tablet or some other field device. And then when you think about this from a cloud perspective, cloud bills have much more detail than telecom bills. It's almost like if you have a telecom background, it's like you're able to see all the call usage, all of the data usage. From a cloud perspective, each one of those all of that is measured at a very granular level, and that detail is potentially provided to you as well. And then you have each of these issues from a software as a service perspective. So each application you have, whether it's a Salesforce or whether it's an Adobe or whatever, or Microsoft Office 365, whatever it may be, each one of these applications has its own specific usage to look at to figure out whether you've got zero usage or you've got these massive usage overages and increases. Those overages, especially look for that from a mobility perspective, where people might be misusing devices that were originally supposed to provide one-off, backup capabilities, and now are being used as primary connections. And then on the bottom left side, you can also see that even for services that have been used correctly and are not necessarily flagging, creating any red flags, there are opportunities to move to more optimized usage plans based on users, volumes, timing, use cases, embedded use cases, other issues. There might be opportunities to move from simply looking at perhaps a traditional 10-user or 20-user bundle to being able to create groups that have a specific amount of usage across these different spend categories. It's important to think about that as well. And then on the bottom right, because it's 2020, there should be a way for you to be able to do this. If you haven't invested in this at this point, there's a lot of information in there, more than any one person can ever manually track. You need some sort of data strategy for this, whether it's having some system in place, having a managed service in place to help you out with that, having an algorithm if you are trained in analytics or machine learning in any way to be able to build models, to be able to quickly track changes and do that on a month-to-month basis. Whatever it is, that strategy is important. And don't worry about this taking away from your day job, because there's more information there than any human could ever process, and you're going to have enough work to do simply in identifying all of the spend categories where opportunities exist, and then being able to follow up on that, and then being able to translate all of that to issues that sourcing and procurement should look at, being able to bring things up with your finance department. That there's a lot of additional steps to do that aren't just lining up specific calls or specific usage categories or types, or looking for zeros on a manual basis or simply by sorting Excel. So think about how you're going to scale this, because frankly, the amount of data, billing data you're going to have to look through is just going to grow over time. And then taxes, surcharges, and fees and discounts also matter as well. So as cash becomes a real issue, think about late fee amnesty. On the consumer side and small business side, telecom companies are already agreeing to not use late fees, not charge late fees until the end of June. See what happens from your corporate perspective. Check with your account manager to see what exists from a late fee perspective and whether you can get that for yourself or from a corporate perspective as well, and to see whether how that late fee refund might be coming back to you. On the upper right, checking about MARC, minimum annual revenue commitments. See if your MARC or other usage commitments are at risk because of not using corporate services in March and April. It may be very possible that you are falling below the limits that you would normally be at. This is the time to bring it up with your account manager that these are extenuating circumstances, acts of God, if you will, something that may be contractually, where you might be contractually able to avoid a big hit later in the month, later in the quarter, later in the year. Simply by bringing this up, be proactive with this rather than try to be reactive and get these huge liabilities removed after they've been added to your bill or to your expenses. On the bottom left, it's a good time to check if discounts match contractual obligations. So discounts are so tricky because they can show up all over the place within your invoice. They can happen at the line item level, the account level, the service level, and sometimes you're not sure whether you've actually gotten your discount as well. But you can at least, expense and sourcing should be working together to figure out whether the discounts that were expected are actually showing up as is, and this is an opportunity to be able to dispute and clean things up as well. And then on the bottom right, checking on surcharges and taxes to make sure they're valid and consistent and showing up or not showing up as they should be. You know, this is the time to be able to clean up your invoices and really think about all of the charges that may be able to scale, because a $5 charge shown 5,000 times starts adding up to real money that represents an opportunity for your company to manage cash better. So if your organization is also is more mature, you might consider a zero-based budgeting exercise where you actually look at all of your IT services. This requires more organization. This assumes that you've already got all of your IT services organized, cross-charged based on whatever you need, cost center, geography, project, etc. And that all you need to do is basically check up with each owner of each service to see how necessary these services are. And this is kind of the spectrum that I think of, whether a service is mandatory, helpful, kind of a luxury, or extraneous to your actual job. If you are at a point where you have this level of organization, you should definitely figure out what else can be either cut or what needs to be enhanced, and make decisions accordingly by basically auditing your environment from a zero-based perspective. I don't recommend this, frankly, if you don't have a super organized environment, or if much of your spend is still being handled on an ad hoc basis. It's just frankly too hard. This is a real audit when you get to this point, and you need either a business partner or a lot of spare time or a well-organized environment to be able to get to this point. At this time, it's in a mid-May COVID quarantine environment. Let's just be realistic here. So the other aspect is around payment processing, and we've talked about payments and some of the issues before. But in a recessionary environment, you have to do what it takes to manage payments correctly, and this means just not just thinking about payments in a normal basis. So tactics to consider. You have in this middle row, later reduced payments, as well as reviewing contractual obligations to pay. And from a late or reduced payment perspective, I think of it as a couple of key tracks. One is around balancing the scale. So if you are, say, reducing payments, I'll just throw out a number, by $10,000 a month. The other side is that your vendor will think about that as, how do I balance that? How am I eventually going to get that money back in some way, either in terms of some sort of commitment, or where am I going to find that extra $120,000 a year to make it up? And there might not be a way to do that, but if there is a way to consolidate kind of long tail spend that is happening in other areas and bring that back to one of your strategic vendors, that might be an opportunity to balance the scale in the long term by saying, well, frankly, cash is tough right now, but if we can get through this point, our long-term goals are to do X, Y, Z once everything stabilizes and once revenue starts coming back. That might be an opportunity if you're thinking about this from a reciprocity perspective. The other side is the brute force method, simply reducing payments and not paying. And this is a tougher situation to be in, especially as we get later and later into this quarantine environment. But if you do so, I highly recommend getting executive support first, talking with your CFO and talking quite frankly about where you are from a cash perspective. There are a lot of, people are looking at cutting costs all across the board and taking pretty draconian measures. So I don't think it'll necessarily be hard to get executive support, but it is hard to really be able to support these later reduced payments without getting your team in place of finance, perhaps tax, perhaps sourcing, really your accounting and finance team that will be associated with making this decision to back you up. And then there's reviewing contractual obligations to pay, looking at your escape clauses, your contractual duties, service level agreements, and seeing whether they've been met or not, whether you have some opportunity to be able to review whether the contract has actually been served or not throughout the past few months for whatever reason. And, this is the time to get ticky-tack. A non-IT example of this, Starbucks is asking landlords for a year's worth of rent breaks. Obviously, Starbucks is a behemoth of a company, but even so, this is the type of volley that companies are putting out from a negotiations perspective. So if Starbucks can ask for this kind of break as a starting point, obviously you have leeway in what you can potentially do with your IT vendors. I'm not recommending doing this. Obviously, this is kind of, I would say, a very extreme scenario. And as you may guess, the request was not well received, according to one real estate source, while another called it ridiculous. Obviously, there's this other side of the picture as well, where taking this kind of approach is not going to make you friends. But at the same time, we are at a pretty extreme financial environment right now, where your executive team may want you to take this type of extreme approach. Just know that it's out there, and it could happen from an IT perspective, just as Starbucks is reviewing their entire real estate commitment right now. So just think about that. So some of the key takeaways for invoice and payment management in 2020, things that you need to think about right now and throughout the rest of the year to take advantage of managing your cash. Remember the IT rule of 30. 30% waste will happen if you leave changing accounts alone. Frankly, even if you've audited in an area within 18 to 24 months, it typically gets dirty again. It's just going to be even worse with extreme amount of change that's happened over the last couple of months, that it accelerates that cycle. Next up, we are at stages 2 and 3 of COVID IT. We figure out how to work together, but this is about securing your environment, confirming your environment, making sure everything is compliant, and then being able to audit so that you can have a benchmark for being able to save money going forward. Next, identify new usage patterns, vendors, products. Figure out how your environment has changed. If you don't know how it's changed or assume it hasn't changed, you're wrong. It has changed, and only the companies that know can document what that change is and where it's occurred are going to be well positioned to actually cut costs and be responsible over the rest of the year. On the bottom row, you can see optimizing usage based on the new normal, and then being prepared to get tough with payment terms. We've seen the extremes that are starting to show up. Hopefully you don't have to get that extreme with your vendors, but know that there will be pressure both from the executive side and just from business drivers in general to potentially take more extreme measures than you have traditionally ever had to do with your technology vendors in the past. Be prepared to do so and work with your executive team as you do so, as this is not an area where you want to be trying to do this alone, and you want to have business a business stakeholder to help you out. So with that, thank you so much for joining me for this webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at TEM Expo at amalgaminsights.com. If you want to know more about the event, please show up. Please show up to that website as well. And with that, thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to speaking with you at a future webinar.